Hello, lovers. I'm Coach Bo, and this is Sexy Times 2 on Neurospicy. Today's question: how can I trick my body into feeling desire? Firstly, I would not suggest that you try and trick your body into feeling desire. I would suggest that you instead feel actual desire. But if you have some reason why you really want to feel sexual desire and you feel that you're unable to do this in the organic ways that you've done it up to now, let's talk about what you could do. So, I was introduced to the work of Dr. Rosemary Basson through Dr. Laurie Brotter. Dr. Brotter has a bunch of amazing ideas about mindfulness and how that is the key to having more satisfying, more intimate, more connected, and more erotic sex. I'll talk about that in a different story time. But Dr. Rosemary Basson had a really interesting concept to explain women's sexual response, and she called it her female circular sexual response cycle, which I like quite a lot because, one, it's non-linear. It's not as though you have a start and you have an end. It is a cycle and continues, and so you can start at any point in the cycle to understand exactly what the cycle is talking about. But the other thing that I really like about it is that it does give an almost step-by-step so that you can track how to get to desire and what are the things that might be preventing you from desire. First, we start off with sexual neutrality. Now, this is neither good nor bad. It doesn't assume any feelings or context about sex. It doesn't assume anything is happening with you, with your partner, etc. We're starting off sexually neutral. And sexually neutral in this context usually means that you are open to the reasons why someone might want to have sex. Now, the reasons why people have sex are as varied as the ways that people like to have sex. So there is definitely no one size fits all. It could be because you want to feel more intimate and close to your partner. It could be because you are making up after a particularly bad argument. It could be because you're trying to make a baby. It could be because you're bored. There are so many different reasons for that, and being open to the reasons for sex and not judging the reasons for sex is a key part of sexual neutrality and sets you up to move from neutral to aroused. Now, what happens in the movement between neutral and aroused? Two things. First, you need adequate stimulation. And second, you need an appropriate context. Now, what stimulation means to you may be varied. It could be physical, psychological, visual, a movie, a touch, a cuddle, a gift. It might be any number of things. Only you really understand what constitutes adequate stimuli. And of course, in different contexts, back to appropriate contexts, that might change. So something that turns you on in one context may be completely different from another. Now, getting to that appropriate context, again, different from different people, and there's no right or wrong answer. Some people want to have sex first thing in the morning. Some people want to have sex only in a bed. Some people want to have sex in the backseat of a car. Whatever is an appropriate context to you, when you have those two things, adequate stimulation and appropriate context, you can move from neutral to arousal. That means that if you are missing one of those things, so say you are really turned on by how your partner is rubbing you, but the baby is screaming downstairs, you obviously do not have both of those things, and therefore you're not going to be able to get aroused. And this might also explain why so many women find it very difficult to get into the space, because so often the adequate and appropriate context is a psychological thing. It is feeling okay about the situation that you're in, the body that you're in, the person that you're with, and all of those things combine into making an appropriate context. Notice that I say adequate and appropriate, not perfect, not great, not good. I'm not really making any value judgments about whether these things are right or wrong, whether you want to do them or not. I'm really just saying that it needs to reach a certain benchmark level, let's say, a minimum viable time for you to get aroused. So then we move on to sexual arousal. This is often thought about in two different ways. So first, there is a objective sexual arousal, which is your body giving you certain cues that you might be aroused. For some men, it's quite obvious because it might result in an erect penis. For women, it could be any number of things. For non-binary people, kind of depends on the parts, but that's not really important. The important part is that there are objectively some things that will happen in your body that will give you some sort of clue to the fact that you are feeling aroused. The second part, which I think is actually more important on some level, is subjective sexual arousal. And this is feeling sexy. So the number of things that make people feel sexy, often it's really linked to their self-esteem, their sense of self-worth, the messages that they've gotten either about themselves, about people like themselves, about people who look like them, about what the category that they find themselves in should behave like. So, for example, the lessons that we hear through childhood about what sex should be like, whether women should feel shamed about sex, when sex should happen, etc., will all feed into how sexy you can feel when you are getting that stimulus and you are in that context, right? Because you cannot remove yourself or divorce yourself from your own psychological context. And all of those things will make you feel either more or less sexy, or less able to feel sexy, or more able to feel sexy. But that's subjective arousal. And the thing that people often do not get right is they believe that you can have just one of those two things in order for you to get to the point where you're able to feel desire and get into a kind of sexually satisfying experience. But you can't. If someone's rubbing you all in the right ways, they know all the moves, they're getting their mouth involved, hands involved, it's all going down. That's fantastic. But if you don't feel sexy, if you don't feel like the person that you're with or like you yourself are giving you what you really want, that you deserve that it's going to be a pleasurable experience, you're probably not going to be able to have a good time at all. And the opposite is also true. If you've invested this money in beautiful, sexy lingerie and you're arriving looking hot, feeling hot, whatever, and your partner is unable to find any of the bits that might, objectively get you hot, that creates a challenge for sexual arousal. You need both subjective and objective arousal to feel sexual arousal. So, where are we in the cycle? We've gone from sexually neutral and open to the reasons for sex. We have some adequate stimulation. We have an appropriate context, and we've gotten to sexual arousal. From sexual arousal, we then get to sexual desire. And this is the thing that, interestingly enough, women are often unaware of when they're actually experiencing sexual desire. They may be familiar with the cues, physical cues usually, of arousal, but many aren't, right? They expect it to look much more dramatic and exciting than it might look in their case. I blame porn entirely for this, and popular media, movies, songs, whatever. And so it often is the case that women who believe that they don't experience sexual desire actually haven't noticed that their body is trying to give them cues. Their mind is trying to give them cues to suggest that they are feeling sexual desire. And they kind of just need to learn how to pay attention to those to get into the moment and experience those. And that's what's called responsive sexual desire, because it is sexual desire that comes about from somebody's actions, whether it's your actions or someone else's actions. You feel sexual desire as a response. This is actually incredibly common. And so for people who believe that there's something wrong with them because they need some stuff to get them up and running, they can't just arrive, take their clothes off and be ready to go. There's nothing wrong with that. It just means that you experience responsive sexual desire as opposed to spontaneous sexual desire. Spontaneous sexual desire probably comes up even before you've gotten into adequate stimulation and appropriate context. You might still feel sexual desire for your partner when they walk into the fast food restaurant that you're eating dinner at that night, right? It has nothing to do with how they're dressed, how you're dressed, where you are, what stimulation you've gotten. You just spontaneously feel the sexual desire. And if that's your thing and you feel that all the time, or some of the time, fantastic. I'm super happy for you. I personally do not experience a lot of spontaneous sexual desire at all. I think it's something also related to being ADHD, is that it does actually take me focusing and really paying attention to experience any form of sexual desire. And it has taken a lot of work on mindfulness, etc., to be fully aware of all those things that are happening, because especially for women and non-binary folks, we haven't necessarily been taught to understand what arousal and then desire will look like for each of us, right? We get a lot of cues about what that looks like for men and how to get men desire, etc. But for women, it's almost taken as a given that we are going to be difficult to satisfy in some way, that we are a mystery, a complex, unknowable thing. And honestly, that's kind of crap, because you can get to this point of making yourself feel sexual desire if you make sure that you are first open to the reasons for sex, adequate stimulation, appropriate context, get the arousal, and then you can get to this point of responsive sexual desire. And quite frankly, an orgasm is an orgasm, whether it happens as a result of you being spontaneously feeling desire or responsively feeling desire kind of isn't the point, because all of that leads to sexual satisfaction in Dr. Basson's kind of cycle. Sexual satisfaction means different things to different people. I happen to think it's the most important aspect of this, because if you don't feel satisfied with whatever sexual encounter you had, you are certainly not going to want to do it again, right? If you're having terrible sex, you're not going to be open to reasons for having sex and not going to be open for having sex in general the same way that you might have before. And that, of course, continues to break the cycle, because we know that sexual satisfaction is often triggered by novelty, its excitement, etc., and the ability to keep your lust going, to keep your desire going over long periods of time, long after romantic love or that kind of primal attraction has passed, because we know that romantic love also lasts like 6 months if you're lucky, maybe like 2 years if you're super lucky. And so you cannot rely on that feeling of love or the feelings of lust, which often fade a lot faster than that romantic love, to keep you getting the sense of desire, of satisfaction, etc. Right? So you have to keep adding novelty to that situation. And we also know that you also have to keep having sex. Regular rhythm of sex, and I'm not going to put any timer on what regular means for you. I think a lot of sociologists, psychiatrists, psychologists, anthropologists have suggested something like once every 10 days might be a good amount to be aiming for. But again, there is no right or wrong in terms of what regular means for you. The point is, if you don't have sex, it also means you are less likely to have sex, right? Because you don't get to the point where you get to reasons for having sex or feeling open to those reasons. You're probably not getting adequate stimulus if you're not having any sex. The appropriate context might be there, but if it's not paired with that openness and that, stimulus, we know that we're not going to get to arousal. And we know without arousal, you're not going to get to desire. So getting to satisfaction is very far away, right? So sexual satisfaction is one of those things that people also ruin for themselves by having a focus on performance. So people who treat sex like it's some sort of test, or that you've won some sort of prize if you give someone or yourself an orgasm, which on some level, I guess, and if that's your kink, like, do you? But for most of us, sex is supposed to be something that's a team sport. It's supposed to be something that is relaxing, that is exciting, that is fun, that is playful. And when you turn it into a performance, a pass or fail, where you expect yourself to show up in a particular way and be able to perform in a particular way, our sexual self doesn't like that. Our sexual self is selfish and childish and does not do well with demands. And so when you say penis, go up right now, that is probably the surefire way to make your penis stop functioning immediately. Similarly, if you try to, say to Lady Vag, like, let's go, I'm ready, do it on demand, she's going to dry up. That's not something that's going to happen if you don't have the right kind of stimulus, context, etc., etc. So what that means for satisfaction and keeping things going over long periods of time is you have to listen to your sexual self and not put the pressure of performance on it, not turn it into a pass or fail exercise, but instead think of the good enough sexual model, right? Which always says that you should believe that sex is going to be varied over your lifetime. Some of it's going to be amazing. Some of it's going to be kind of crap. That's totally fine. And in fact, totally expected. And you don't have to be trying to get to perfect sex. You have to be trying to get to good enough sex, which for the most part is going to be great for both of you. Because if you treat it as a team sport, something you are doing with your intimate sexual partner, buddy, friend, soulmate, playmate, whatever you want to phrase it, it's a lot easier to get to the place of playfulness, of openness, and ultimately of satisfaction than it is if you're treating this as, did they have an orgasm? Tick, I'm doing a good job, right? So take away the demands and the expectations about the performance, and it really enables you to focus on pleasure. And pleasure-orientated mutual satisfaction is way better than performance or goal-orientated, when you are fixated on giving someone something for very obvious reasons, right? If your brain does not enjoy taking tests and trying to perform in other situations that are not nowhere near as vulnerable as the situation you might find yourself with your clothes off in your bed about to have some sexy times, it's really not surprising. And I shouldn't be saying something that particularly surprises people. But it may also give you some sense about why, even though you've been open to sex, had the stimulus, blah, 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 you are still not feeling satisfied. Because it could be a case that one, you're trying to get to satisfaction alone and you're not treating it like a team sport. Or two, you are trying to focus on a goal, on getting something done, on achieving something, on making someone feel something, yourself or another. And that kind of goal orientation is not something that your sexual self enjoys or can function particularly well with. Then we get to the point where after satisfaction, we get back to sexual neutrality, right? We get back to being open for the reasons for sex because we've had satisfaction in one particular area. And so the circle, the cycle of, circular sexual response cycle continues. And we see where it gets cut off or broken. And so I guess the answer to how do you make yourself feel desire? Can you hack your brain, trick your brain into feeling desire? Technically, yes, but really what you should be doing is focusing on creating the appropriate context with adequate stimulation with the right person so that you can remain open to regular sex, feel arousal at appropriate times, and invest in paying attention in the mindfulness that you can notice when you're experiencing that response of sexual desire. And hopefully that leaves you to much more satisfaction and much more sex as the cycle continues. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you next time. That particularly surprised